I have spent 400 years of my life learning every road in a mind, and on the third day of the human's recovery, I learned that I had never once seen a mind build a new one. My name is Senek Vale. Among the ESA, I hold the second chair of synapse physics at the Concord Station Korath, which means that when something is found inside a skull that no one understands, the finding is brought to me. I am old enough to have stopped expecting surprises. The nervous system of a thinking creature is a settled country. The pathways are laid down in youth, hardened in maturity, and after that they are only worn, never rerouted. This is the first law any student of mind learns, and it is true of every species the Concord has ever cut open and studied. It was true, I believed, of the universe. I should explain what we are because the rest will not make sense otherwise. The ESA think with a lattice. Inside our heads there is not soft tissue but a structure of fine crystalline filament, grown over a lifetime into a fixed architecture, every junction a decision made once and kept forever. It is a beautiful thing. It is also a fragile thing. A deep wound to the lattice does not heal. A severed filament does not regrow, does not find another path, does not improvise. It simply goes dark, and whatever it carried goes dark with it. A child of ours who takes a hard blow to the head loses, permanently, whatever that region held: a language, a face, the ability to count, the memory of a parent. We do not recover from such injuries. We mourn them. Our entire civilization is built around the protection of the lattice. Our helmets, our slow, careful wars, our laws against violence to the head, our reverence for the mind as the one part of us that cannot be mended. To break an ESA's lattice is to kill the ESA, even if the body breathes on for years afterward empty. So you will understand the mood in the observation theater on the morning they brought the human up from the recovery dock. We had taken her from a fortified position on the third moon of a contested system, after the brief war that the war arm had assured the Concord would last a season, and which had, in fact, already cost us 4 stations and the better part of a fleet. The position had been struck by our own ordnance, a clean strike, the kind that leaves nothing standing. Our recovery teams went in expecting to catalog the dead. Most of the human garrison was dead. But in the wreckage, they found one of them still moving, dragging herself along a collapsed corridor toward a sealed door. And when they lifted her into the light, they saw why the war-armed surgeons had sent her to me instead of to a grave. A fragment of structural alloy, no longer than my smallest digit but driven with great force, had entered the left side of her skull above the ear, passed through the brain, and lodged against the inner wall of the opposite side. It was still there. The recovery surgeon, a careful man, had photographed it in place and then declined to remove it, on the grounds that the patient would not survive the hour and the fragment was the only thing he could think to study. He was certain of the hour. So was I. I read his report on the way to the theater, and I confess my chief feeling was irritation that I had been called from other work to watch a corpse finish dying. Her name, the War Arms Intelligence Section told us, was Reyes, Sergeant Ada Reyes. She was 31 of her world's years. The intelligence file was thin. Humans had been a known species for less than a decade and a hostile one for less than a year, and most of what it contained was guesswork dressed up as fact. I did not expect to need it. You do not need a biography to attend a death. The theater is a steep bowl of seats around a central platform, sealed under a transparent dome, with the great scanning array suspended above. On the platform she lay on a recovery cradle, and around me in the lower tiers sat the panel, 9 synapse physicians of various standing, 2 from the medical faculty, and in the front seat at the rail, the war arms attaché, a hard old officer named Drevin who had requested to observe, and whom none of us had the standing to refuse. The intelligence section wanted to know whether the human could be made to talk before she died. The medical faculty wanted the body. I wanted to go home. We woke her to take a baseline. This is standard. Before a creature dies, you record what is still working so that the death itself can be studied as a loss. I expected very little. With a fragment through the brain, I expected, at most, a few moments of confused reflex before the lattice. I caught myself, She had no lattice before the tissue gave out. She opened her eyes. She looked at the dome above her, at the array, at the tiers of us watching her. And then she said something in her own language that the translation engine rendered for us a half-second later in the flat, neutral voice it uses. "Where's the rest of my squad?" It was not a question. The engine marked it as a statement. She knew the answer. She was asking anyway, the way the grieving ask, and there was no panic in it and no plea, only a kind of tiredness, the tiredness of someone who has already done the arithmetic and is simply confirming the total. I want you to understand how wrong this was. She had a metal fragment lodged through the speech and comprehension regions of her brain. By every law I had ever taught, she should not have been able to form that sentence. She should not have been able to know what a squad was, or that it was hers, or that it was gone. The pathways that carried those things should have been severed, and severed pathways are silent. I looked at the recovery surgeon's image again. The fragment was exactly where he had photographed it. Nothing had moved, and the human had asked in a complete and grammatical sentence where her dead were. Drevin at the rail made the small dismissive gesture his arm uses for matters beneath its notice. "Reflex," he said. "Trained speech. It will degrade." He had read the same first law I had. He was not wrong to expect what we both expected. We all expected it. We turned the array on and prepared to watch a mind go out. That was the first morning. I tell it slowly because everything that came after depended on how certain we all were in that first hour that we were watching the ordinary end of an extraordinary injury. Certainty is the thing this story is about. It is the thing I lost. The scan came up over the platform in the volume above her, a luminous model of the inside of her skull turning slowly so all the tiers could see. There was the fragment, a hard, bright line of dead alloy. There was the wound channel around it, a ragged corridor of damaged tissue running from one side to the other. And there, fanning out from the channel, was a wide region the scan painted in the cold gray we use for tissue that has stopped carrying signal. Dead ground. A great deal of it. More than enough in any species I had ever scanned to end a life or empty it. "Mark the dead regions," I told my second, a young physician named Oris whose work I trusted. He marked them. The gray spread across the model like frost. The speech regions largely gray. A long stretch of the motor pathways gray. A section of what in her architecture corresponded to the seat of recent memory gray. By the model alone she should have been mute, half paralyzed, and unable to hold a new thought for longer than a breath. "Test the marked regions," I said. "This is the cruel part of the baseline, but it is necessary. You confirm the loss by asking the creature to use what it has lost and watching it fail." Oris put the standard battery to her through the translation engine. Simple things. Name the object shown. Count the lights. Move the left hand. Repeat a phrase. She named the object. She counted the lights correctly to 9. She moved the left hand slowly, with a tremor, but she moved it, the same hand whose motor pathway glowed dead gray on the model above her. She repeated the phrase. I sat very still. Around me the panel had gone quiet in a particular way I had heard perhaps 3 times in my career, the silence of trained people watching something their training forbids. Oris looked up at me, and I saw in the set of his face that he wanted me to tell him he had marked the regions wrong. I had watched him mark them. He had not marked them wrong. "Again," I said, "the left hand again." She moved it again, and on the model above her as she moved it, a thread of live signal, the warm gold the scan uses for active pathway, traced a path through her brain to the hand. But it did not run through the gray. It ran around it. It looped wide, through tissue that on any other creature's map carried something else entirely, borrowing roads that were never built for this purpose, and it reached the hand by a route that did not exist in any atlas of any mind I had ever studied. The hand moved. The road that moved it was a road I was watching her use for the first time, a road that, I would later become certain, had not been there an hour before. I have tried many times since to describe what I felt in that moment to people who were not in the room, and I have never found the words in my own language. let alone in the flat tongue of the translation engine. The closest I can come is this. Imagine you have spent your life as a cartographer of a country whose every river and road is fixed and known and unchangeable, where the loss of a bridge means the loss of everything beyond it forever. And imagine you watch on your own map a river that has been dammed simply decide to flow uphill, cut a new channel through solid rock in the space of a breath, and arrive at the sea by a route that was not there when you looked away. That is what I watched. The dead ground stayed dead. The signal did not raise the dead. It went around them. It found another way. And the human, who could not have known any of this was happening inside her, simply moved her hand when she was asked, as though moving it were the most ordinary thing in the world. "Stop the test," Drevin said from the rail. There was a new note in his voice. He had come to watch a corpse confirm our intelligence, and instead he had watched a wound fail to do its work, and the war arm does not like to watch a wound fail. "It is compensating," he said. "It has spare capacity. The injury was less severe than the surgeon believed." "It was exactly as severe as the surgeon believed," I said. "I am looking at the same image he photographed. Nothing has moved. The fragment is where it entered. The regions are dead where they died." I did not raise my voice. One does not in the theater. Attaché, the human is not using the dead regions. The human is using new ones. "Tissue does not build new pathways," Drevin said, and he said it the way I would have said it the day before, with the flat certainty of a settled law. "No," I agreed. "It does not. Ours does not." I looked down at the platform, at the human on the cradle who had turned her head with a fragment through her brain, and was watching the model of her own ruined skull turn above her with an expression I could not yet read. "I think we should ask her," I said, "what she expects to happen." So we asked her. The translation engine put my question to her in its flat voice, and she listened, and I watched her listen, and I noticed for the first time that she was not afraid. I had attended many deaths of many species, and the dying are afraid, or they are resigned, or they are too far gone to be either, but they are never calm in the way she was calm. She lay under a dome full of creatures who had taken her prisoner, with a piece of metal through her head, and a model of her own destruction turning above her, and she answered me as though I had asked her about the weather on her world. "You're asking what I think's gonna happen to me," she said. The engine rendered the contraction. It does that when a speaker is relaxed. "Honestly, probably I get better, slower than I'd like. Some stuff won't come back the same. I'll forget words for a while, then they'll show up again, usually at 3 in the morning. She paused. "Lost my left field of vision for about a month after a roadside thing few years back. Came back. Mostly." She tipped her head a fraction toward the model. "That what you're so worked up about, the hole?" No one answered her. The tears were silent. I understood slowly that she did not consider the hole in her head to be the central fact of the morning. She considered it a complication, an inconvenience that her own body would, in its own time, work around. She had done it before. She expected to do it again. She had, I realized, a relationship with damage to her own mind that was so casual, so worn in, so entirely without horror, that she had assumed the only reason a room full of physicians would gather around her was professional curiosity, rather than the existential vertigo that was, in fact, spreading through the tears like cold water. "You have a fragment lodged in your brain," I said, through the engine. I wanted to hear how she would receive the plain fact. "Yeah," she said. "I can feel where it is, kind of." She was quiet a moment. "Things are a little scrambled. Words are slippery. I keep reaching for the one I want and grabbing the one next to it, but that's day one. It sorts itself out." And then she said the thing I have repeated more times than any other sentence I have ever heard, the thing I put at the head of my report, the thing the war arm tried for a season to have struck from the record. "Brain's smarter than the damage," she said. "Always has been. You just gotta give it a minute to find the way around. You just gotta give it a minute to find the way around." I have turned that sentence over for the rest of my life. To her, it was nothing. It was a thing soldiers of her world say, The way one says a thing one has heard so often one no longer hears it. To me, it was the most frightening sentence I had ever been told, because it meant that what I was watching was not a miracle, not a freak, not a single extraordinary creature whose body had done an impossible thing once. It was ordinary. It was expected. Among her kind, a wound that would erase one of us forever was a thing you gave a minute to, and then it found the way around and you went on. She had a word for it I made the engine repeat 3 times before I believed the translation. The word was recover, not survive. Recover. A word that assumes the road comes back. The second day, I did the work I should have done the first day instead of waiting for a death that did not come. I put her under the long scan, the deep one, the one we use to map an entire architecture filament by filament, and I left it running for 10 hours while she slept, and I watched the whole time. I watched her brain rebuild itself. I do not know a calmer way to say it, so I will say it plainly, the way I said it to the panel. Over the course of those 10 hours, while she lay unconscious and her body did the slow work of staying alive, the live signal in her brain shifted. Pathways that had been forced into wide, painful detours around the dead ground began slowly to straighten, not by raising the dead tissue, which stayed gray and silent and dead, but by recruiting the living tissue at the edges of the wound, tissue that had been doing other work, and teaching it to do this work instead. The map was redrawing itself. A region that on the first morning had handled some fragment of her sense of touch had, by the 10th hour, taken up a share of the speech that the dead speech regions could no longer carry. Function was migrating. The mind was not waiting passively to be repaired. It was actively, hour by hour, moving its own roads, abandoning the ruined country and building in the living country next door, redistributing itself across whatever tissue remained. The way a city whose center has burned does not die, but spreads its commerce into the surviving districts and goes on. Ora sat with me through the night of the long scan. He is a young physician, and the law of the fixed lattice is the bedrock of everything he believes, the way it was mine, and I watched him watch the map redraw itself, and I watched something in his face that I recognized, because I had felt it the morning before. It is the particular fear of a person whose certainties are being taken from them not by force but by evidence, which is the only thief there is no defense against. Near the end of the night he said to me, very quietly, "Physician, if their minds can do this, if a wound to the mind is not an end for them but only a delay," he could not finish it. I finished it for him. "Then there is no part of them you can break that stays broken," I said. "You take the country and they move to the next country. You take that one and they move again. You cannot empty them by damaging them. The damage is something they root around. It is to them." And here I used her own word, the word the engine had taught me, and I felt the cold of it in my own lattice, a friend. A thing that arrives and that they have learned to live beside, not an enemy that ends them. A condition they incorporate and carry and use. It was quiet for a long time. Then he said the thing that I think the war arm never understood, the thing that mattered more than any fleet. "We have been fighting them," he said, "as though they were us, as though to win we needed only to do them enough harm. And all this time," he gestured at the map, at the living road still moving across the dead ground, patient and tireless and entirely unhurried, like water that has all the time in the world to find the sea. All this time the harm has just been teaching them. On the third day we brought the panel back together for the cognition battery, the full one, the formal test that goes into the record. I will not recount all of it. I will tell you the part that ended the room. We tested her against her own baseline from the first morning, the morning the fragment had only just gone through her, when half her function had shown dead gray on the model. We expected, if the war arm's view were correct, to find her diminished, a creature getting by on spare capacity, permanently lessened by what she had lost. We expected, if my view were correct, to find her recovering slower in some things, scrambled in others, the words still slippery as she had said. We did not expect what we found, which was worse than either, worse for us, worse for everything the war arm had been telling the conquered about how this war would be won. She was better than her baseline, not recovered to it, better than it. On the third day, with the fragment still lodged exactly where it had entered, she named objects faster than she had on the first morning, held longer sequences in recent memory, and moved the left hand with the tremor nearly gone. The mind had not merely rooted around the wound. It had, in routing around it, woken capacity it had not been using, recruited tissue to new purposes, and arrived at a configuration that performed certain tasks more efficiently than the configuration the wound had destroyed. The damage had not lessened her. The damage had reorganized her, and the reorganization was, in places, an improvement. I watched Drevin understand it. He was a hard old officer, and he had come to my theater certain of two things: that the human would die, and that, dead or alive, she was a problem the war arm could solve with sufficient force. He sat at the rail and watched a creature his own ordnance had shot through the brain grow measurably more capable across 3 days of captivity, and I watched the first of his certainties die on the first morning and the second die now, on the third, and I will give him this. He did not look away. He watched it all. When it was finished, he sat for a long moment with the model still turning above the platform, the dead gray country and the living gold roads that had grown around it. And then he asked me the only question the war arm ever really needed to ask, the question I had been dreading since the first morning because I knew my answer. "Physician," he said, "if we cannot end them by breaking their bodies, and we cannot end them by breaking their minds, what is it, precisely, that you propose we break?" I did not have an answer for him. I do not have one now. I have spent the years since searching for one, and I have not found it, and neither, I notice, has the war arm, which is why there is a peace now where there was a war. An uneasy quiet bought not by any victory, but by the slow arrival in the high councils of the thing I learned in my own theater across 3 days, that you cannot win a war by inflicting damage on a species that has made damage its friend. I wrote the report that night. I wrote it plainly, without the softening the war arm asked for afterward, because the panel had seen what I had seen, and a softened report would have been a lie they could all read through. I wrote that the human nervous system does not obey the first law of mind. I wrote that it does not hold its architecture fixed but rebuilds it continuously, that it treats catastrophic injury not as an ending but as a problem to be rooted around, that it recruits living tissue to replace dead, and in doing so sometimes exceeds what was lost. I wrote that you cannot empty a human mind by wounding it, that the wound teaches it a new road, and it walks the new road as calmly as the old, and that any strategy premised on doing humans sufficient harm to make them stop is a strategy premised on a law that, where humans are concerned, is simply not true. I wrote that we had been fighting an enemy we did not understand, and that the most dangerous thing about them was not their fleets or their weapons, but the casual, worn-in, entirely unhorrified relationship they have with the breaking of their own minds. And then, because the report needed an ending, and because I am a physician and not a poet, I wrote down the last thing the human said to me. On the morning they took her down from the platform to send her home in the prisoner exchange that the war arm, by then, was very eager to arrange. I had asked her, through the engine, whether she understood what we had found, whether she understood that what her brain had done across 3 days was, to every other thinking species we knew, impossible, whether she understood that she had frightened a room full of physicians more thoroughly than any weapon her people possessed. She thought about it. She was sitting up by then, the fragment still in her head, the words coming easier than they had, the left hand steady. And she gave me the look one gives to a person who has badly misunderstood something simple, and she said, "It's not a superpower, Doc. It's just a brain doing what brains do. Yours just quit when it got hurt. Mine doesn't know how to quit. Nobody ever taught it that part." Then she said the thing I put at the very end of the report, the line that the war arm tried hardest to have removed and that I refused, because it was the truest sentence I heard in 3 days, and because every officer who reads it understands. The way I understood. Exactly what kind of enemy we had decided to make. "You can hurt me all you want," she said, and there was no threat in it, no boast, only the flat, tired honesty of someone explaining a fact about the weather. "I'll just learn the hurt and keep going. That's all I've ever done. That's all any of us do." We sent her home. The fragment, the surgeon told me, she declined to have removed. She said she'd gotten used to it. She said her brain had already worked out where it was and built around it, and that taking it out now would only make her relearn everything a second time, and she didn't see the point. He told me this as though it were a curiosity. To me it was the whole of it, the entire species in one small refusal, a creature carrying a piece of the thing that should have killed it, not as a wound but as a companion, having simply incorporated the catastrophe into the ongoing fact of being alive and walked on. I am very old now and I no longer hold the second chair. The students who come to me still learn the first law of mind, that the architecture is fixed and the wound is an ending, because for us it is true and it will always be true, and it is the saddest and most important thing we know about ourselves. But I teach them now that there is at least one mind in the universe for which the law does not hold, one kind of creature that hears the wound that ends us and gives it, in their own flat words, a minute to find the way around. And I tell them what I have come to believe, which is not in any report, which I have never written down until now. We thought when we found her that we had captured something broken. We spent 3 days learning that there was nothing in her we knew how to break. And the thing I cannot stop turning over in the long quiet of being old is that she was never the exception. She told me so herself on the platform, and I did not want to hear it. There is a whole world of them, and they are all like that, every one, and they do not think it remarkable. They have a word for it, and the word is recover, and it assumes the road comes back, and for them it always does. You just gotta give it a minute to find the way around. I gave it 3 days. I have not stopped finding new ground inside that sentence since.